I was exactly 5 minutes late to the meeting. Yet, the moment I pushed open the conference room door, the newly appointed marketing director slammed her metal pen onto the table. Her voice was ice cold as she yelled in front of more than 30 managers. "Which department are you from? It's your first day, and you already lack basic professional etiquette. What are you standing there for? Go down to the lobby and buy coffee for the whole room." Now, I looked at her for a few seconds. Then I looked at my laptop, which contained the entire acquisition file for a domestic tech company, now being snatched from my hands by her. I calmly asked, "Does everyone take black cold brew?" That afternoon, I had been held up in my private office longer than expected to urgently finalize a critical clause in the acquisition of a precision component manufacturing plant in Portland, Oregon. That portfolio was worth over $85 million. A single typo could cost the corporation millions, so I couldn't delegate it. When I finally signed off on the last digital memo, the mechanical watch on my wrist ticked exactly to 2:05 p.m. The regional strategy meeting had been underway for 5 minutes. I didn't have my assistant call ahead, nor did I use the main double doors. I quietly slipped in through the back door of the blank daughter of the blank multimedia conference room on the 12th floor. The black walnut conference table was packed. On both sides sat department heads, regional managers, and a few fresh interns recently hired for this new corporate campus in Austin, Texas. At the head of the table sat a woman around 35, her posture rigidly straight, hair pulled into a sleek bun, wearing a tailored white blazer and sharp makeup. Her name was Miranda, the new regional marketing director, headhunted and brought into the corporation just last week. Because the Austin campus had just opened, aside from a few core executives, very few people here had met me in person. I rarely made public appearances. Anyway, today I was dressed simply in a cream silk blouse and wide-leg black trousers holding an unbranded silver laptop. At first glance, I looked no different from an ordinary office worker rushing to a meeting. The click of my heels against the tile was soft, but enough to make Miranda stop mid-sentence. She frowned, throwing a glaring look my way before slamming her pen down. The sharp metallic clack silenced the room. "Stop right there. Which department are you with? Do you realize this is a management strategy meeting? Showing up late on your first day, do you expect the entire room to wait on you?" I paused, my hand still on the door handle. I spoke calmly. "I have matters to discuss with the CEO, and I figured I'd sit in on the marketing strategy for this acquisition." Miranda let out a thin, contemptuous laugh. She looked me up and down like a cheap item misplaced on a luxury shelf. "Discuss matters with the CEO, do you? I think the CEO is someone a junior staffer can just casually meet. Millennials and Gen Z these days have zero sense of hierarchy. If you're late, admit your fault. Don't make up such ridiculous excuses." Sitting next to her was Howard, the former marketing head of the new campus. Howard glanced at me a few times. He clearly didn't recognize me, but terrified of looking bad in front of the new boss, he immediately changed his tone and barked, "What are you still standing there for? Apologize to Miranda right now. You have zero situational awareness. No wonder you're only fit for running." Errant. I looked at Howard. Previously, his performance reviews were rated slightly above average, nothing outstanding, but no major flaws either. Yet, in just the brief moment, I saw his true nature. A textbook sycophant who bullied subordinates to please his superiors. Miranda leaned back in her ergonomic chair, crossing her arms. Her voice was flat enough. "I don't have time to listen to your excuses. The whole room is thirsty. Go down to the lobby cafe and buy coffee for everyone. You have 20 minutes to get back. If you're short a single cup or late by 1 minute, don't bother coming into HR tomorrow." Saying that, she abruptly reached out and snatched the silver laptop I was holding against my chest, slamming it down next to the head chair. "Leave the laptop here as collateral, so you don't use the coffee run as an excuse to skip out. Pierce Holdings doesn't pay useless people. If you want to stay, learn how to obey first." The room was dead silent. A few managers lowered their heads, pretending to review their tablets. A few young interns at the end of the table looked at me with a mix of pity and fear. No one spoke up. In their eyes, I was just an unlucky new hire, chosen by the new director as a sacrificial lamb to establish dominance. I looked at my laptop sitting next to Miranda's hand. It contained highly classified financial reports, acquisition terms, audit data, and the highest level master access to the corporation's servers. Had I been anyone else, I might have immediately called security. But right at that moment, I found the situation highly amusing. I had been at the helm of Pierce Holdings for many years. I'd met all kinds of people, the genuinely brilliant, the frauds, the talented but arrogant, and the incompetent who loved to throw their weight around. Miranda belonged to the most dangerous category. Someone who hadn't contributed a single thing yet but wanted to build authority through humiliation. She thought that by forcing a close-in clade, subordinate to bow before the entire room, they would all learn to fear her. I wanted to see exactly what this director, who was being paid a base salary of nearly $400,000 a year, was actually capable of beyond ordering coffee. I asked, "Does everyone take black cold brew then?" Miranda didn't even look up. "Hurry up. Don't dawdle and waste our time." I nodded, turned around, and left the room. The heavy door closed behind me, cutting off a few soft chuckles and harsh whispers. I took out my phone and texted Nathan, the president of the corporation, who was on the upper floor. "Hold off on coming down. Don't call me. I'll be back with coffee." Nathan replied instantly. "Chairwoman, is everything all right? I just sent one more text. Let me watch how this play ends." 19 minutes later, I walked back in carrying 2 large drink carriers. As I pushed the door open, Miranda was standing in front of the smartboard, presenting the first phase of the PR plan. Seeing me return on time, a tine of disappointment crossed her eyes, as if she regretted not having a new excuse to fire me. I placed a coffee in front of each manager. When I got to Miranda, she picked it up, took a sip, immediately grimaced, and slammed the cup back down. Coffee splashed over the edge of her documents. "Why is this so bitter? I told you to buy something drinkable. You're doing this on purpose, aren't you?" I pulled out a napkin and handed it over, my voice steady. "The lobby cafe only had this roast left. If you need it sweeter, there are sugar packets at the Claudi's in A room's kitchenette. But I gently advise against drinking heavily roasted coffee on an empty stomach. It causes acid reflux, especially since I'm going to be a long meeting." Howard immediately slammed his hand on the table and stood up. "You're a junior associate, and you dare lecture leadership? Miranda correcting you means she values your growth. If you can't do a simple task, own up to it. Stop talking." Back. Miranda looked at me, a sneer on her lips. Zero competence, endless excuses. "Howard, pull her HR file for me later. I want to know which college produces people who show up late, can't even buy coffee properly, and dare to interrupt a management meeting." I pulled out an empty chair in the corner of the room and slowly sat down. "The coffee is bought. Now, I'd like to hear Director Miranda's plan. If the strategy truly holds value, I'm willing to learn. But if it's just a beautifully designed PowerPoint with zero substance, I think the person whose performance needs reviewing isn't me." Miranda's face instantly darkened. She didn't know who I was, and neither did anyone else in the room. But from the moment I sat in that chair, this play was no longer about a new employee being bullied. It had become the first real test for the entire Austin campus management team. And the person failing this test certainly wasn't me. Miranda stood before the screen, her eyes shooting daggers at me. In her mind, I was just an insubordinate rookie trying to grab attention with meaningless pushback. The rest of the room thought the same. No one knew that from the moment I sat down, I was observing everything. I watched how Miranda presented. I watched the reactions of every department head. I watched to see who was actually engaged and who was just nodding along to save their skin. That had been my real objective in attending this meeting. The screen displayed the header, Phase 1 PR Strategy for Portland Tech Plant. Acquisition. Miranda adjusted her lapel mic and continued. Her voice brimmed with confidence. "Once the acquisition closes, we will inject $1.5 million into a multi-platform media campaign. The goal is maximum brand saturation within the first 6 months." Around the table, a few managers immediately nodded. Howard even started a light applause. "Brilliant. That is exactly the kind of modern marketing mindset we need. Miranda looked even more smug. She clicked to the next slide. Next, we will partner with high-tier tech influencers for product endorsements. We need to make this plant the most viral name in the sector. Hearing this, I slightly furrowed my brow. The corporation was acquiring manufactured industrial sensors and automated robotics components. Their clients were massive enterprises, industrial parks, and heavy-duty manufacturing conglomerates, not direct-to-consumer retail. Pouring over $1 million into mainstream influencer marketing was like throwing cash into an incinerator. But what caught my attention wasn't even that. On the next slide, a specific line item appeared, a special allocation of $300,000 listed as local partner, support and integration fees. When I saw that line, my eyes locked onto it. I was the one who personally approved the entire budget for this acquisition. I knew for an absolute fact that this expense did not exist in the master financial plan. In other words, someone had secretly added it. I looked up at Miranda. She was still talking endlessly, but in my eyes, her facade of confidence was beginning to crack. I slowly raised my hand. Director Miranda, I have a question. The entire room turned to look. Miranda's annoyance was palpable. You again? I replied calmly. I just want to ask what the $300,000 allocated for the local partner is actually being used for. Miranda paused just for a fraction of a second, but I caught it. A professional who truly understands their budget never stammers over a line item. She quickly regained her composure. That is standard market relations overhead. I think everyone here understands how business works. I nodded. Relations with whom? Miranda stiffened. The room suddenly grew quiet. I continued. Which partner? Which agency? Who is the point of contact? Why is there a $300,000 preliminary expenditure when the acquisition contract hasn't even been signed? 3 consecutive questions wiped the smirk off Miranda's face completely. Howard hurriedly intervened. What do you know about corporate operations? This is an executive decision. I turned to look at him. You're the regional marketing head. Do you know what this money is being used for? Howard choked on his words. He didn't know. In truth, besides Miranda, nobody in this room knew. But the terrifying part was that no one dared to ask. They were afraid. Afraid of offending the new boss. Afraid of being labeled insubordinate. I looked at the faces around the table. So many capable people, yet they had been conditioned to keep their heads down. That was the real tragedy. Miranda lost her patience. This is an executive meeting, not an interrogation. Room for a junior associate. I demand you stay quiet. I smiled. If that expenditure is legitimate, you should be able to explain it effortlessly. If you can't explain it, then we have a massive compliance issue. Miranda's face flushed red. She slammed the table. Enough. I am under no obligation to explain myself to you. You lack the clearance. I am not debating this. I didn't argue. I simply quietly took out my phone and opened a file. It was the master budget PDF, the version carrying my digital signature. I glanced at my screen and asked, then can you explain why the approved budget is $1.2 million? Yet your presentation today totals $1.5 million? The moment the question hung in the air, the room froze. This time, it wasn't just Miranda. Howard turned pale. That number was too specific, too exact. It wasn't something someone could just guess. The way the managers looked at me began to shift. They no longer saw me as a new employee. An ordinary staffer would never have access to top-tier financial data. Miranda swallowed hard. For the first time, she truly felt a wave of panic. Where did you get that information? I didn't answer. I just looked at her calmly. Answer my question first. How was an extra $300,000 inserted into the ledger? Miranda's hands gripped the edge of the table, her acrylic nails digging into the wood. Right at that moment, her phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a caller ID. Her eyes darted to it, shifting nervously, and she immediately declined the call. But seconds later, it rang again. Then a third time. Fourth. A manager sitting nearby accidentally caught a glimpse of the caller ID. It was saved under a strange name, Apex Consulting, Bradley. In that split second, I recalled a name from an internal audit report from 3 days ago, Bradley, a known corporate broker who specialized in setting up shell companies and had been loosely tied to several budget embezzlement schemes in the past. I didn't say anything, but in my mind, I already had the answer. It seemed today's drama was far more complex than I thought. It wasn't just an arrogant new director throwing her weight around. Behind her, there was likely a dark money network trying to leech off this $85 million acquisition. I locked my phone and quietly looked toward the conference room door. Because, right at that moment, a text from my executive assistant popped up on my team. Smartwatch. Chairwoman, the Special Audit Task Force has arrived on the 12th floor. I lowered my wrist. In the hallway outside, the sound of purposeful footsteps was approaching. Inside the room, Miranda had no idea that what was waiting for her behind that door was no longer just an argument. The footsteps grew louder, but the room remained oblivious. Miranda was desperately trying to maintain her authoritative facade, but the harder she tried, the more her anxiety leaked through. Truly competent people, when questioned, use data to defend themselves. People hiding something only try to stall for time. Miranda was doing the latter. She took a sip of her water, glaring at me. Who exactly are you? I think that's the question you need to answer first, I replied. Silence blanketed the room. I smiled faintly. Who do you think I am? Miranda gripped her glass. I don't care who you are, but I know you're deliberately sabotaging this meeting. From the moment you walked in, you've been disruptive and insubordinate. I have every right to have security escort you out. I nodded. You have the right to request it. But before you do, you should answer the question about the missing $300,000. Hearing that number again made Miranda flinch. The managers exchanged uneasy glances. At first, they thought this was just a clash between a toxic boss and a rebellious newbie. But now, everything had changed. $300,000 wasn't pocket change. It was enough to fund a startup or pay an entire department's salary for months. No one dared to take this lightly anymore. Howard, sensing the situation spiraling out of control, stood up. We are discussing strategy. This isn't an inquisition. You have no clearance to ask these questions. I turned to Howard. You're the regional head of marketing. If $300,000 was added to the budget and you didn't know, you're grossly incompetent. If you did know and didn't report it, you're an accomplice. That single sentence choked Howard. The blood drained from his face. He knew, full well, that whichever way he answered, it was a death sentence for his career. The room plunged back into a suffocating silence. Then, a knock came at the door. Knock, knock, knock. 3 steady, measured knocks. Not too aggressive, but authoritative enough to make everyone turn their heads. Miranda frowned. Come in. The heavy door swung open. The first man to step in was around 40, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit. The moment they saw him, several managers gasped. It was Henry, the chief audit executive of Pierce Holdings, a man so notoriously strict that even senior VPs feared him. Behind Henry were 3 forensic auditors and 2 corporate legal counsels. The atmosphere in the room turned instantly oppressive. Miranda forced a stiff smile. Henry? What brings audit down here? Henry didn't answer her. He swept his gaze across the room until his eyes locked onto me. In the next second, he offered a deep, respectful nod. Good afternoon, Chairwoman. I nodded back. That simple exchange seemed to freeze time. Everyone in the room watched as the most feared executive in the corporation respectfully bowed to the woman they thought was a junior hire. The woman who was ordered to fetch coffee. The woman threatened with termination. The contrast was so jarring that no one could process it. Miranda's face lost all color. She looked at Henry, then at me, her eyes widening in pure, unadulterated panic. Henry opened his leather briefcase. I have been instructed to conduct an RT-EPSI, immediate on-site audit regarding the budget allocations for the Portland Tech acquisition. Miranda tried to laugh, her voice trembling. There must be a misunderstanding. I only took over this project recently. Henry calmly flipped open a folder. Whether it's a misunderstanding or not, To be determined after we cross-reference the data. For now, we are confiscating all related materials. He signaled his team. The auditors immediately stepped forward, collecting printouts, tablets, and the presentation laptop. Miranda leaped up. "You can't do this. This is a marketing department meeting." Henry looked up, his voice absolute zero. "As of this second, this is a tier 1. Internal audit. You are required to cooperate." The air in the room grew thick. I sat perfectly still, observing. I wanted to see their true reactions. When there is no danger, everyone speaks beautifully. But when personal interests are threatened, true natures are revealed. Just as I predicted, a senior sales manager spoke up. "Henry, I think this is an HB. Overreaction. Miranda hasn't been here long. We can resolve this internally, without a scene." 2 others quickly agreed. On the surface, it sounded like colleagues protecting one another. But I knew better. They weren't protecting Miranda, they were protecting themselves. If the $300,000 pipeline was truly corrupt, it would likely drag down a whole web of accomplices. I quietly memorized their faces. Henry saw it too. He didn't argue, he just kept working. 10 minutes later, an IT forensic auditor walked quickly to Henry and whispered in his ear. Henry's expression darkened. He turned to Miranda. "In your corporate inbox, there is an email that was permanently deleted 30,000 minutes ago." Miranda jolted. Henry continued. "The sender was Apex Consulting, the exact entity slated to receive the $300,000 allocation. Care to explain?" Sweat began to bead on Miranda's forehead. For the first time, she had no immediate comeback. The room was deathly quiet. No one dared to defend her anymore. The evidence was materializing. But right at that moment, the most unexpected thing happened. The conference room door flew open again. Nathan, the president of Pierce Holdings, strode in. He walked fast, his expression gravely serious. Seeing the president appear, everyone in the room shot to their feet. I was the only one who remained seated. Nathan ignored everyone else. He walked straight to where I was sitting in the corner. Then, under the astonished gaze of dozens of managers, he slightly bowed his head. "My apologies, Chairwoman. I got here as fast as I could." At that exact second, the glass of water Howard was holding slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. Miranda looked like she had stopped breathing. The entire room went numb. Everyone understood. A corporate president would never bow to an ordinary employee. There was only one impossible reality. The woman sitting before them, the woman they sent to buy coffee, the woman they mocked, was the highest authority in the room. And in one more second, my true identity was going to be completely laid bare. The shattering glass echoed like a gunshot in the suffocating silence. No one viewed me as the new girl anymore. Nathan stood back up and turned to Henry. "Report status." Henry read from his tablet. "Preliminary verification confirms the $300,000 line. Item in today's presentation does not exist in the board-approved ledger. Furthermore, IT just recovered the deleted email. It shows evidence of back-channel communications between Director Miranda and Apex Consulting." Miranda's legs gave out, and she sank into her chair, her whole body shaking. The managers who had defended her moments ago practically hid their faces. I surveyed the room, then slowly stood up. The moment I rose, everyone collectively held their breath. "Sit down," I said softly. No one hesitated. Everyone dropped back into their chairs in unison. Nathan took the empty seat to my right. The sight of it utterly destroyed Miranda. The only person capable of commanding the president and the chief audit executive like this was one specific individual. I walked to the head of the table, the exact spot where, an hour ago, Miranda had sat with absolute arrogance. I set my unbranded silver laptop down, looked across the room. I imagine some of you are wondering who I am. No one answered. They were terrified of the next sentence. "My name is Anna Pierce. I am the founder of Pierce Holdings and the current chairwoman of the board." Even though most had already deduced it, hearing me confirm it sent a shockwave through the room. The young interns at the back looked completely paralyzed. They couldn't fathom that the woman carrying the Starbucks trays was the billionaire founder of the corporation. Howard stared at the mahogany table, his neck flushed crimson, sweat pouring down his temples. If he could turn back time, he'd probably slap himself across the face. But regret is useless in business. I looked at Miranda. She sat frozen, eyes bloodshot, lips trembling. I didn't yell. I didn't slam the table. I didn't try to humiliate her. At my level, those actions are meaningless. I want to ask you one question, I said. Miranda flinched and looked up. When you took this position, what was your first priority? To do the job well, or to make everyone fear you? She looked bewildered. I don't. Was it competence or intimidation? I pressed. She lowered her head. Her silence was the loudest answer. I slowly walked down the length of the table. A lot of people, when they first acquire power, make the exact same mistake. They think that to manage people, they must instill fear. They mistake yelling for leadership. They mistake humiliating subordinates for strength. They think forcing compliance makes them an executive. But in reality, it is nothing but a manifestation of profound insecurity. My words rang crystal clear. I built this corporation from a 300 square foot leased garage. I used to be the lowest person on the totem pole. I've been looked down on. I know exactly how it feels to have your dignity stepped on, and because of that, I know that for a company to thrive, capable people must be allowed to speak. I stopped right behind Howard. He shot up like a rocket. Chairwoman, I raised a hand, stopping him. Do you know what your mistake was? Howard bowed his head. I didn't catch the financial discrepancy. No. I shook my head. That only proves your technical skills are lacking. Your biggest mistake was seeing something blatantly wrong and choosing to become a cheerleader for it. Pierce Holdings pays you a salary to work, not to kiss the ring of your superior. Howard turned deathly pale. He couldn't argue, because every word was the brutal truth. I turned to the other managers. And the rest of you? Did anyone notice the kolomesata nolla anomalu? A few hands slowly, shamefully went up. Then why didn't you speak up? I asked. No one could answer, but the truth was simple. Fear. Fear of the new boss. Fear of retaliation. Fear of losing their six-figure jobs. But that silence is the most dangerous toxin to a business. A company doesn't die because of strong competitors. It dies when its smartest people get used to bowing their heads. I looked at every single face. Remember this. I do not need yes men. I need people who have the courage to tell the truth, even if the person who is wrong happens to be me. As I finished speaking, several managers looked down in shame. At that moment, an IT auditor walked quickly over and handed Henry a fresh printout. Henry scanned it, his expression darkening further. Chairwoman, the investigation just escalated. I turned to him. What is it? Henry took a deep breath. The $300,000 is just the tip. We found that Apex Consulting has received 3 subcontracting payouts from the Austin campus over the last 6 months, totaling over $4 million. The final approver on those contracts? A VP of logistics named Thomas. Nathan frowned. Thomas? I know him. He's an 8-year veteran of the company. His record is spotless. Which is exactly why he flew under the radar, I said. Smart people are always more dangerous than greedy ones. It gets worse, Henry added. HR just confirmed Thomas filed for emergency PTO this morning. His corporate phone is dark, and he cleared out his apartment. Hearing this, I slowly closed my laptop. A chill swept through me. This was no longer just about a power-hungry marketing director trying to siphon a kickback. There was a puppet master, someone deeply embedded in the corporation who understood the operational architecture flawlessly and who had been covering their tracks for months. When Miranda heard Thomas's name, her eyes widened in sheer terror. The shift was microscopic, but I caught it. I looked dead at her. You know Thomas, don't you? She gasped. For a fraction of a second, absolute panic overtook her. That was all I needed. I had hit the nerve. And if I had hit the nerve, it meant the person pulling the strings was realizing the net was closing. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Texas sky was turning a bruising gray. A massive thunderstorm was rolling in, mirroring the storm brewing inside Pierce Holdings. And Thomas, the man who had vanished into thin air, was merely the first domino. The room felt entirely devoid of oxygen. Outside, heavy raindrops began to violently strike the glass. Miranda tried to compose herself. Chairwoman, I have no idea what you're talking about. I've only been here a week. How could I be involved with an 8-year veteran like Thomas? I didn't answer. I looked at Henry. Comms log. Henry pulled a document. We pulled the server logs. Over the past 8 days, your phone pinged Thomas's number 23 times. 11 of those were after business hours. Gasps echoed around the table. Miranda went white. What does that prove? He was helping me on board. Discussing work is normal. Discussing work is normal, Henry agreed smoothly. But over the last 3 days, the two of you met at an off-site coffee shop 4 times. Specifically, the night before last, you were there for 3 hours. Miranda looked like she was going to be sick. Howard stared at her in disbelief, finally realizing how deeply he had been played. I leaned on the table. You know what caught my eye, Miranda? It wasn't the money. The money is just the symptom. What fascinated me was how a director with less than 10 days of tenure managed to access budget allocation bypasses that even VPs don't have. To do that, you need an inside man, Thomas. Nathan's voice dropped an octave. HR, confirm. An HR rep stood up. Confirmed. 3 days before Miranda started, Thomas submitted a request to expedite financial approval workflows, citing project velocity. The managers exchanged horrified looks. By loosening the compliance protocols, slipping illicit invoices through became child's play. Miranda slumped into her chair, utterly defeated. I looked at her. Are going to explain? She bit her lip, staying silent for a long time, before suddenly looking up with pure desperation. Yes, I know Thomas. The room buzzed. Even Henry looked slightly surprised she confessed so quickly. Miranda let out a bitter laugh. But I'm not the mastermind. I narrowed my eyes. Explain. Thomas approached me, she said, her voice hollow. He knew I wanted to climb the ladder fast. He told me he could guarantee me massive, visible wins in my first quarter. All I had to do was sign off on a few vendor lists and let a few invoices pass. In exchange, I'd get a cut and a stellar performance review. The room grew colder. I wasn't surprised. People like Miranda are rarely the plain architects. They are the tools, ambitious, impatient, and easily blinded by greed. Who is behind Thomas? I asked. I don't know. She shook her head. He never said. But I overheard him on a call once. He called the guy Bradley. Nathan's head snapped up. Bradley. I turned to him. You know him? Bradley used to be our VP of Finance, Nathan said grimly. He resigned 3 years ago to start his own VC firm. Henry typed furiously on his tablet. Got him. Apex Consulting, the shell company. Receiving the funds is registered to a holding group. The majority shareholder is Bradley. The puzzle pieces violently snapped together. Thomas, Miranda, Apex Consulting, and Bradley. A financial extraction web meticulously constructed over years, not months. I looked out the window. The rain was torrential now. If I hadn't sat in this room today, if Miranda hadn't been so hungry for dominance that she literally snatched my laptop, the first $300,000 would have vanished, then $4 million, then $10 million, until the $85 million acquisition was bled dry. I stood up. Henry, freeze all accounts tied to Thomas and Bradley. Audit every project they've touched in the last 2 years. Yes, ma'am, Henry said. I looked at Nathan. Have IT revoked Thomas's access globally? Contact state. Authorities. Track his vehicle. We have to find him before he disappears. Nathan stood up. Just then, Henry's phone buzzed. He looked at it, and his face dropped. Chairwoman. DPS just flagged Thomas's license plate. He's on I-10 East, heading toward Houston. He's making a run for the port or the international airport. The room tensed. I tightened my grip on the edge of the table. The puppet master knew we were onto them and was burning the evidence. If Thomas vanished, the chain broke. I checked my watch. Have my car brought around. I'm going to Houston. Nathan stepped in my way. Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. Let the state troopers handle it. I shook my head. If we wait, he's a ghost. We go now. My gut was screaming at me. Thomas wasn't the end of the line. Bradley wasn't the puppet master. Someone else had to be pulling the strings, someone with enough internal juice to place Thomas, protect Bradley, and blind the auditing system for years. 40 minutes later, we were speeding down the highway in the pouring rain. Henry sat in the front passenger seat, feeding me updates. Chairwoman, Thomas's personal accounts show deposits totaling over $1.5 million. Over 2 years, routed through Bradley's shell companies. I wasn't surprised, but suddenly, my phone rang. It was my mother. I hesitated, then answered, "Hi, Mom. Are you working late again, Anna?" Her warm voice came through. "Did you eat?" The tension in my chest eased slightly. "Just dealing with an emergency, Mom. Don't worry. Money isn't everything. Your father worked himself into an early grave. Take care of yourself," she sighed. "I know, Mom. I love you." I hung up. It reminded me of the early days in an unheated Chicago warehouse. Nathan and I used to sleep under our desks. Mom would drive through blizzards to bring us thermoses of beef stew. I would never let anyone destroy the company built on that kind of sacrifice. 2 hours later, we crossed into Houston city limits. The local police had set up a perimeter. A detective approached our SUV. We found his car abandoned near the old ship channel. Henry and I exchanged looks. A classic burner route. What was inside, I asked. A smashed burner phone and a waterproof document bag. The detective handed me the evidence bag. Inside were crumpled subcontractor invoices, but at the very bottom was an old, faded Polaroid photograph. When I saw it, my breath hitched. There were 4 men in the photo. Bradley was one. Thomas was another. The third, I didn't recognize, but the 4th man made my blood run cold. It was Lawrence, the current executive vice president of strategic investment at Pierce Holdings, a man who had been by my side for 8 years. Henry saw the photo and audibly gasped, "That's impossible." I gripped the photograph. For the first time tonight, pure, unfiltered rage spiked in my veins. If Lawrence was involved, the rot wasn't just in the floorboards, it was in the foundation. Under the harsh yellow lights of the Houston Port Authority field office, Lawrence's face in the photo mocked me. If Bradley built the outside network and Thomas executed the plays, Lawrence was the only one with the corporate clearance to shield them from internal audits. Could it just be a coincidence? Henry asked quietly. "Look at the photo," I said. "They're in their 20s, arms around each other. This isn't a networking event. They've been friends for a decade." My phone buzzed. It was Nathan calling from the Austin HQ. "Anna, Lawrence just called an emergency late-night session of the executive board." I narrowed my eyes. "Right now?" "Yes. He's petitioning to suspend the audit department's server access, claiming Henry is conducting an unsanctioned rogue investigation that threatens the Portland acquisition." I let out a dark chuckle. The innocent wait for the investigation. The guilty try to shut it down. Let him hold his meeting. I'm heading back. "Understood," Nathan said. 3 hours later, at 1 a.m., my SUV pulled back into the Austin campus. The executive floor was brightly lit. When I pushed open the boardroom doors, 20 executives were seated. Lawrence was at the head of the table, wearing his signature gray suit, looking entirely unbothered. When I walked in, the room stood up. Lawrence remained seated, offering a polite smile. "Chairwoman, you're back." I sat directly across from him. "I hear you called an emergency meeting." "I did," Lawrence said smoothly. "Audit is running wild. They are seizing assets and terrifying the marketing team. We are going to lose the Portland deal." I looked at him. "Are you worried about the deal, Lawrence? Or are you worried about something else?" His smile stiffened for a microsecond. "I don't follow." I didn't argue. I slid the faded Polaroid across the long mahogany table. It stopped right in front of him. The executives leaned in. Lawrence looked down. When his eyes hit the photo, his pupils contracted. It was microscopic, but I saw it. "Do you know these men?" I asked. He was silent for 3 seconds. "Yes. We took a corporate leadership seminar together a decade ago. So you know Bradley. And you know Thomas." The room started to murmur. Lawrence remained impossibly calm. "Knowing someone isn't a crime, Anna. You can't accuse an executive VP based on a college-era photo." It was a perfect defense. Notice how he didn't ask why I was showing him the photo? He didn't ask what Thomas did. He didn't ask about Bradley. He was preemptively defending himself because he already knew the context. I looked at Henry. Henry pulled out a bank statement. "Lawrence, can you explain?" Why $200,000 was wired from Apex Consulting into your brother's LLC 8 months. Ago? Lawrence's mask slipped. The room gasped. Nathan looked stunned. That was a private loan repayment, Lawrence said, his voice tightening. What about the $300,000 last month? Henry fired back. Routed through 3 shell companies before landing in a trust fund under your wife's maiden name? The executives backed away from the table as if it were on fire. The numbers were irrefutable. Lawrence's hands gripped the armrests. But right then, Henry's phone rang. He listened for 5 seconds, and his face turned to ash. Chairwoman. They found Thomas. Where? I demanded. Houston Memorial Hospital. He was just in a catastrophic car crash. He's in critical condition. I stood up instantly. A crash? No. This was a silencing. Someone had gotten to him before we did. Nathan jumped up. I'm coming with you. I looked at Lawrence. He hadn't moved, but there was a strange, chilling lack of surprise on his face. Lawrence, I said coldly. You are not to leave this building. Security will escort you to your office. Are you detaining me? He challenged. I'm protecting you, I replied, because whoever just took out Thomas might come for you next. We raced back toward Houston in the dead of night. By the time we reached the manned Proston ICU, state troopers were guarding the door. The attending trauma surgeon came out, looking exhausted. He's fading fast. Massive internal trauma. Did he wake up? I asked. For about 2 minutes. He was delirious, but he kept repeating a name. What name? Paul. Nathan and I looked at each other. Paul? That name wasn't in any of our files. Did he say anything else? I asked. He kept mumbling about a basement level 3 and a server. My heart hammered against my ribs. A nurse ran out. Doctor, he's crashing! We rushed to the glass. Inside, Thomas was hooked up to a dozen machines, his eyes fluttering. He looked past the doctors and made eye contact with me. Through the glass, I could read his lips before the heart monitor flatlined into a continuous, piercing scream. I'm sorry. The doctors swarmed him with paddles, but my mind was already racing. Paul. Basement level 3. Nathan looked at me. The Austin campus has a subterranean level 3. It's the decommissioned legacy server room. My phone suddenly vibrated. Unknown number. I answered it. A digitally altered, deep mechanical voice spoke in my ear. Anna, do not go to the basement. I froze. Who is this? An old friend. Or an old enemy. Let this go, Anna. Some graves shouldn't be dug. Up. The line went dead. I lowered the phone. Whoever Paul was, he was watching us. Right now. He had an inside feed. We're going to the basement, I told Nathan. Now. We flew back to Austin as the sun began to rise. At 6 a.m., our IT strike team cut the electronic locks to sub-level 3. The air was frigid, smelling of ozone and old dust. Rows of dead, towering server racks loomed in the dark. But at the very back of the room, a single modern laptop sat on a folding table. The screen was glowing. Henry ran diagnostics. Someone was here less than 2 hours ago. On the desktop was a massive folder containing hundreds of gigabytes of data. Offshore accounts, blackmail material on executives, offshore ledgers. It wasn't just $4 million. The network had siphoned nearly $10 million over 5 years. Chairwoman, an IT tech called out. There's an encrypted video file here, labeled, for Anna. Play it, I ordered. The screen flickered. A man wearing a black hoodie and a medical mask sat in front of a camera. His voice was altered, the same as on the phone. If you're watching this, my failsafe's tripped. You think Lawrence is the mastermind? Lawrence is a pawn. I set up the wire transfers to his family. I fed the audits. I controlled Thomas. Nathan clenched his fists. The man continued. 10 years ago, Pierce Holdings was just a startup in a Chicago garage. 2 people built it. One was hailed as a genius. The other was thrown out, stripped of his equity, and left to rot. Is that fair, Anna? The breath left my lungs. 10 years ago. I don't want your money, the man said. I want you to feel what it's like to have your empire hollowed out from the inside. Open the final file, Anna. See you soon. The video ended. The tech clicked the final file. It was an old scanned HR document from the founding of the company. Co-founder and chief technology officer, Paul Sterling. Nathan looked like he had seen a ghost. Paul? Your original partner? I thought. He moved to Europe a decade ago. I stared at the screen, a suffocating weight pressing down on my chest. Paul, we, had built the company together. He was brilliant, but reckless. He wanted to gamble our seed funding on a highly illegal data mining venture. I vetoed it, fired him, and bought out his shares for pennies because the company was broke. He lost his house, his fiancée left him, and he vanished. He didn't go to Europe. He spent 10 years infiltrating my company. Where is the IP ping coming from? I asked the tech, my voice eerily calm. It's routing through a local VPN. Wait, it's not far, an old industrial park. On the east side of Austin, near the river. I knew exactly where it was. It was the very first warehouse we rented when we moved the company from Chicago to Texas. I turned to the door. Bring the state troopers. As my car pulled up to the rusted gates of the East Austin warehouse, the blank morning sun was breaking through the rain clouds, casting long, golden shadows over the wet pavement. I told Nathan and the troopers to stay outside. I walked into the cavernous, empty warehouse alone. Standing by a broken window, looking out at the Colorado River, was a man in a gray coat. His hair was graying, his shoulders slumped, but the silhouette was unmistakable. Paul, I said. He turned around. 10 years had aged him 20. His eyes lacked the fiery ambition of the kid I built servers with. They were just tired. You're late, Anna. He smiled sadly. You didn't have to do this, I said, stopping a few feet away. You dragged innocent people into this. You nearly killed Thomas. I didn't touch Thomas, Paul said quietly. He panicked and drove his car off. An overpass. I just used his greed. Why, Paul? If you wanted money, you could have asked. I didn't want your charity, he snapped, his voice echoing in the empty warehouse. I wanted my life back. You took my code. You took my company. You sat on a throne while I filed for bankruptcy. I saved the company, I fired back. If we ran your project, we would have gone to federal prison. I protected us. You protected yourself, Paul whispered. He walked over to an old, dust-covered workbench and set down a USB drive. Everything is on this drive. Every shell company. Every compromised vendor. Evidence that clears Lawrence he was just an idiot who took a loan from the Bosting. Wrong guy. Evidence against Bradley. I looked at him, realizing the truth. You didn't want to destroy the company. You just wanted to prove you were smart enough to beat me. Paul looked down at his hands. I just wanted you to admit that you couldn't have built this without me. That I mattered. The anger drained out of me, leaving only profound sadness. 2 kids in a garage. One became a billionaire. The other became a ghost. You mattered, Paul, I said softly. You wrote the base code that made us who we are. I never denied that. My biggest regret is that I never checked on you. After you left. Paul's eyes welled with tears. He let out a long, shuddering breath. For 10 years, he had carried a mountain of hatred, only to realize that the person he hated hadn't forgotten his worth. He put his hands behind his head and fell to his knees. As the state troopers breached the doors, weapons drawn, I watched as they put him in cuffs and led him out into the Texas sunlight. A month later, the purge at Pierce Holdings was complete. Bradley was indicted by the FBI for wire fraud. Thomas survived his surgeries and flipped state's evidence in exchange for a plea deal. Miranda was fired, but I quietly arranged for her to get a junior marketing role at a mid-sized firm. She was arrogant, but she wasn't a criminal. Howard was demoted to an all-in-summer place like Wade, associate role to relearn corporate humility. Lawrence was cleared of criminal charges, but stepped down from the board, realizing his blind trust had compromised the firm. As for Pierce Holdings, I instituted a radical transparency protocol. Any employee, from intern to VP, could anonymously flag budget anomalies directly to Henry's audit team without fear of retaliation. On New Year's Eve, I drove to my mother's house in the suburbs. She poured me a tea, a cup of hot coffee, and sat next to me on the porch. You look tired, sweetheart, she said. I leaned my head on her shoulder. I am, Mom, but I feel lighter. She patted my hand. Being a leader isn't about making people fear you. It's about making them feel safe enough to follow you. I looked out at the snow falling on the lawn and smiled. A 5-minute delay to a meeting had sparked a hurricane, but it had washed away the rot. And so, The story of Anna, Paul, and Pierce Holdings comes to an end. But as always, the lessons linger long after the dust settles. What strikes me most isn't the corporate espionage or the undercover CEO. It's Paul. 10 years is a long time, long enough to build a new empire, but he spent it dwelling in the ashes of the old one. Holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. And Anna? She reminds us of what true leadership looks like. Not the ruthless, untouchable executive, but someone with the humility to admit her past mistakes and the grace to give second chances. To anyone climbing the corporate ladder, remember that your title doesn't demand respect. Your character does. If you build your success on deception, the foundation will eventually collapse. If you enjoyed this story of ambition, redemption, and the human condition, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast, leave a review, and share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have forgiven Paul after a decade of sabotage? Let us know. Stay kind, stay honest, and we'll see you in the next episode.